Hello, all. So you have so far learned how to write the beginning portion of your lesson plan. You have learned to extract Iowa Core, Common Core, NAFME, or other standards that you need to use for your subject area. And also you have practiced writing an objective using ABCD or audience, behavior, condition, and degree. So we kind of practiced that so far. Now it's time to complete the rest of the lesson plan with some more details. When you were writing the objective, I was encouraging you to be more concise. Don't include too much detail. Just include the A, B, C, and D. Now, for the rest of the lesson plan, you can be as specific as possible. It's probably helpful for yourself when you're in your first 2 or 3 years of teaching to have a more detailed lesson plan to be able to go back and revise it for the next time that you teach something. And also, it's helpful for a substitute teacher. The more complete the lesson plan is, the more helpful it is. So, the next step after Iowa Core, Common Core objective is to write the purpose of this lesson. So pretty much the purpose is including, so after all of these objectives that are met, so what is it that students can do? Now you just want to say that in a simple word that by the end of this lesson, students are able to or will be able to summarize a text, or students will be able to compose a music. Now, the purpose doesn't require all the ABCD that you had in the objective. It is more general, but it is also a simplified way of explaining what is it that students are going to be able to do after this lesson is over, or what is it that they're learning today. So that's what the purpose is. Now, if there are additional information that you'd like to include here that is not in your objective, this is a good place to include what are some of the things that you want the students to take away or learn. The anticipatory set is pretty much how you start the class. So here on is what is happening in your classroom. These are all what you're planning on, and you want to make sure that everything else that you plan is going to be relevant to your standard and objective, kind of supporting those. But here is the actual work that you're doing in the class. So the anticipatory set is how you relate what you're teaching to your students to the students' experience, the past experience that they have, the real life. Because if you don't make a good case that why doing something is important for them, or why is something even relevant to them, sometimes you cannot get them motivated. In some cases, the anticipatory set also includes reminding of previous knowledge. So if I need to, just like what we did in the class when we worked on the Iowa Core and Common Core objectives, before I teach this, I have to make sure that my students have access or remember how to write an objective. So if there is anything that you need to remind them that they have already learned, or if there is an example, if there are words that they need to know, or certain language that they need to be aware of, those are everything that you include in that anticipatory set. After that, we have the modeling, or I can. Now, we like to write the objectives in the I can statement, but also what happens in the modeling is what you're teaching them. So you're doing it for them and showing it as the steps that you go. So if it is a math, you tell them, this is the problem, this is what these different words mean, and this is how we solve this kind of problem. So you showed all the steps. In a lot of cases, you may ask question, but you may also answer your own question. But you also have the check for understanding on the 3 steps that you take for teaching a course. So always it's good to check for the understanding, and that's kind of a formative assessment. It forms the learning. It makes you sure that students are following, that they are learning, and if they have a question, they would be able to ask. One example of modeling is I would read a page of a book that I want them to summarize. I would pause after reading one page and I would say, okay, so what happened in this, what we read? And then they talk about that. And then I try to say that how we summarize what we read in. So what we read is one page. Now we want to summarize it into one sentence. How can we do that? And then I write one summarized sentence as an example so they can see how I do it. Now, the guided instruction weekend is where the students get to practice that. So you have a problem, or you show them another example, or however you're teaching something, then you have them take the responsibility to solve it, or kind of help you do it together. And then if you feel like they didn't get it very well, you may decide that you're going to teach it again or reteach it. And then sometimes in some cases you have to see if there is any other way to explain a problem to them, because if they didn't understand it one way, you cannot just repeat yourself. Sometimes it takes working with individuals, but a lot of time it is something that you will realize that there are some things that I need to teach again because maybe students were not paying attention, or maybe it was too new for them. They need more practice. So that's where the guided instruction happen. You work with them, you help them figure something out, sometimes reteach something. And in a lot of time, you also have some kind of group work and activity for them to do, just to monitor that they are learning. Then it comes the independent practice, or you can, or they can. So something that students should be able to do on their own. You want to have something, some kind of problem, some kind of learning activity that they will be working on individually. A lot of time, the independent practice is given to students as a homework. While that is an appropriate practice, you don't want to limit that only to homework, because it's sometimes good to let the students do something independently in class and then have some peer assessment, or you go around and see how they are doing, because sometimes you may not be able to review the homeworks as carefully, and if that doesn't happen and you don't catch where the student is struggling, that can be a problem. So try to make sure that the independent practice includes some activity that they will do individually in the classroom and independently. So if you were answering some of the questions in the guided instruction, in the independent practice, you let them try it themselves. If they made a mistake, in a lot of cases, we try to reach out and help those individuals who are struggling in an individual conference or one-to-one meeting, or sometimes after the class. Then it comes the closure. Never finish your lesson by saying that, okay, the class is over. You want to tell them that how they will be using this information that they learned. you want to sometimes go back and say, okay, so what did you learn today? And have them tell you some of the things that they learned. So make it more meaningful. Review what happened in the class and how this knowledge is going to be used in the future, and how it is just like in the beginning where you had the anticipatory set, you were connecting it to their past. In the closure, you want to connect what they're learning today to what is going to happen in the next lessons or in the next years, and what are some of the other things that they will learn about in a language that is meaningful for the students. We also have assessment. Now, as you see, there is check for understanding under every the modeling guided instruction, and I think there should be one here, but it's not under this template. But you want to check for understanding. You want to go back and check and make sure that students are learning as you are teaching. But you also want to have a way of assessing overall learning or summative assessment. So the assessment that is here, you can actually link other formative assessment that you had at the top of the page. Also include what other ways you will use to assess the students' learning. Are you taking tests? Are you giving them some activity or project to complete? So if you have any of that, make sure that you're also mentioning that here. Enrichment, extension, and modification. So when you have students in the class who finish everything so quickly, sometimes while other students are still working and they need more time, maybe 5, 6, 10 minutes, you see that 1 or 2 students have finished what they needed to do already in the independent practice. So you want to make sure that you have an activity that is meaningful, preferably relevant to the goals and objectives of the lesson, but something rewarding for those students and something that helps them move forward and learn something new. So they are not limited to the rest of the class. They are not stopped just because they finished it quickly. So that's enrichment, extension, and modification. So sometimes you feel like you may need to add some kind of instruction to a certain group of people. So you may have some group learning, coming back and working together, or modify the way that you have taught. If there is a student who is struggling and need more time to practice or need more instruction because they're still not getting exactly what they need to be doing, you need to make sure that you have some time in your lesson plan to work with them. At the same time, you want to make sure that those students who have finished have something fun or something relevant to do. Don't make this as a punishment or reward system. Sometimes sometimes it's okay to have some kind of reward, but I wouldn't use this as a reward system. So I wouldn't give the student the right to play the game or other games that are not relevant to this lesson if they have finished, because sometimes it's okay if it is relevant to the lesson, but if it is not relevant, it is some kind of a punishment for the students who just have some learning difficulty, and it is to some extent can be unfair and saddening for those who may need a little more time to stay focused on the learning activity. So just make sure that you have something much more relevant to the course rather than using an iPad or playing or something like that. So in the enrichment and modification, you want to make sure that you include a plan for both students that are finishing early, and you also want to make sure that you have some kind of plan for students who may need more support. That might be peer review, it might be yourself and other aid that you may have in the classroom, but that's one thing that you want to make sure to include in your lesson plan. This also can be very helpful when a substitute teacher comes to the class and you have an aid person there. And in a lot of cases, people don't use the aid appropriately, but when you have a plan, you can communicate that to the aid in advance, and they will make sure to work with the students that need that individual or personal attention. Materials. Materials is anything that you have. It can be just a book and pen and pencil and paper, because you have about 30 students. If one or two students don't have those simple basic materials, that can lead to an issue when there are more students who don't have it. You want to make sure that you have planned it in advance. You have made sure that everything is working, everything is enough for all the students that you have. If you're using laptops, iPads, or other electronic devices, you want to make sure to include them here, because you want to make sure that the updates are not running at the time that you need to use them. And some of those little technical pieces that you want to be cautious of. Another thing that is always good to include is so any detail, wherever you can find the electronics, where you can find the material, and also if they need to be checked, like if there is an application that you need to install, you want to make sure that you have installed it before the class starts, because that can take a whole lot of time from your classroom, and you don't want your lesson to be incomplete or interrupted. So make sure that you have all of those materials, anything that you can think of that you're going to need included, whether they are sometimes, they are tangible things like pen, pencil, paper, but sometimes they are not tangible, but they are like an application or an update or something. So just make sure that you include any of that, any book that you use. In a lot of cases, when you were writing your objective, you would say after reading the text. So in that case, you want to say the text that was mentioned in the objective 1 or 2 is this or that. So make sure to include those details as well. I hope you find this helpful. Just go ahead and revise your objectives, and you revise your objectives based on what we discussed in the class, and also complete the rest of the lesson plan. Make sure to submit it before Friday at 10 p.m. And we will talk about this more in the class and take some time to give each other a little more feedback on improving our lesson plans. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.